Welcome to our weekly program, the inside story of Chabad in America through the Mindel archives. I mentioned last week about the Farbrengen I had in Eretz Yisrael. You can always click back and see. And there's some questions that the people had. They also had this question about when the Rebbe came with the Rebbetzin to America in 1941, what was the Rebbe busy with? The Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe Rayatz was the Rebbe then. So what did the Rebbe do? And they wanted to know about coming to America. So besides learning, they knew the Rebbe was a big Lamdan, and the Rebbe learned all the time, but is there anything else that the Rebbe is anhogye? So they wanted to know, number one, where the Rebbe lived, what was his parnasa, and how did Merkez begin? I did mention once about how Merkez began, a letter, how it was established that Rabbi Mindel wrote to the Rebbe, to the previous Rebbe about Merkez, which I'm going to share the letter with you. But before that, I want to say that we discussed this at that Farbrengen in Israel, that the Frierdiker Rebbe sent Rabbi Shmuel Levittin, and I think Rabbi Jacobson also, to be Mekabel Ponim to meet the Rebbe when he came with the Rebbe in 1941 with the boat. Go meet my son-in-law, who is Klor, Shas, Poskim, Talmud Yerushalmi, Talmud Bavli, Kabbalah, Kol HaTorah Kulo, everywhere. And I forgot the Loshen, this is all written by Rabbi Mindel. A person that goes Hatzin Aleches, very modest, and he goes with a gartel and with the head down. That's what Rabbi Mindel writes. And I think that's what he said. Go be Mekabel Ponim that person. Because nobody knew the Rebbe before. The Rebbe was very modest. He didn't show anything. Nobody really knew him. Maybe a few people that knew him from France. But nobody knew the Rebbe. But soon as the Frierdiker Rebbe said, go be Mekabel Ponim, that person, they knew what type of person the Rebbe is. So the Rebbe came to 770. He didn't have Yechidus right away, the way Rabbi Mindel writes. But the Rebbe moved in. He lived in his Yechidus room. That was his apartment. That was his bedroom. At night, the Yechidus room was a bedroom, and in the daytime it was an office. And the Rebbe worked with Rabbi Mindel in that office from 1941. The Rebbetzin, Chaim Mushke, was upstairs with her mother, Rebbetzin Nechamedine, with her Baba, Rebbetzin Shtendesore, the first year, when she passed away in Tavshin Beis, and also his sister Chane, and also Manya. We spoke about Manya. Manya was the nurse of the Rebbetzin Shtendesore, and then she became the nurse of the Rebbetzin of the Rebbe. There's a whole Maisa with Manya. I have a whole Maisa with how she gave me the coat, which I don't want to go into today. We have no time for that. Manya came on the boat with the Frierdiker Rebbe. 11 people came 1940 to America. They came with a small plane from Sweden to from Riga to Sweden. From Sweden they took a boat. There were 11 people there, and Manya was part of it. Manya was the nurse. There's a lot to talk about Manya, but anyways, so in the daytime she was over there. She got very, very close to Manya. That's why she and Manya were like sisters. And with the Frierdiker Rebbe used to give presents to her daughter, to his daughters, to the Rebbetzin and to Chana, he also gave a present to her because he considered her like a daughter. She lived upstairs. She wasn't married then. The Frierdiker Rebbe, Rabbi Mindel writes, used to say a maimer every Wednesday night in the Rebbe's Yechidus room. On a microphone. And the Rebbe worked in a navy yard. Pashut a parnasa. Can you imagine the Rebbe chlorine the whole Torah? But he needed pashut honest parnasa. He went to the navy yard. Almost every day, almost, not every day, almost, he went to Manhattan to West End Avenue. There was a Dr. Alexander. He was a big specialist. He was a lung doctor. People those days in the 40s, refugees, zu Brochen Yidden, sick people, used to come to this doctor from Europe, and the Rebbe used to go and speak to them, give them hope. Sit there, the doctor, Mamish, the nurse was named Fagi, that's doctor's wife, that office at West End. And they loved the Rebbe. A young man, they didn't know the Lubavitcher Rebbe, but they saw the way the Rebbe sich abgegeben to these refugees that came. This was in 40s, that's what the Rebbe did. And Rabbi Mindel saw also, Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, the Rebbe came the end of Sivan. Rosh Chodesh, a few days later, that the Rebbe davened, it was Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, you davened Shachris with film, and then before Musaf, you had to put Rabbein Tam. So the Rebbe went to a corner. He didn't want nobody to see, but Rabbi Mindel saw that he put on 4 pair of tefillin. And the Rebbe was in such a Hatzna Lech that he didn't want people to know that he puts on 4 pair of tefillin. So Shibush Rabbe, and Raivit, Rabbi Nitam, and Rash's tefillin. And later on we know that the previous Rebbe said about a guf noki, that only whoever has a guf noki, a clean body, puts on his tefillin. Anyways, one of the things he wrote when the Rebbe's Hatzal Lechas. The Rebbe, Rabbi Mindel writes, went to the Frierdiker Rebbe and he stayed a long time, twice a week in the 40s. Every week before Kabbalah Shabbos and after Havdalah. Rabbi Mindel writes something interesting, that the Rebbe danced Simchas Torah a whole night, and in order not to make too much noise, because the Frierdiker Rebbe lived upstairs and that shul was downstairs, so the Rebbe took off his shoes and he was dancing without shoes a whole night Simchas Torah, because not to make noise to bother the Frierdiker Rebbe. Also he saw the Rebbe went to the mikveh every day. He tabled many times in the mikveh. And a few more things. And so in the daytime, he worked there. Now, he worked on Talks and Tales. All the writings, the beginning was Rabbi Mindel and the Rebbe. The Tanya in English, the Shulchan Aruch, the letters, the memoirs. The Rebbe looked over and has Hagos, notations and everything. That was done in that room in the daytime. Whenever the Rabbi went to work, the Rabbi used to come back right away. He went to work together. Rabbi Mindel showed him what he did, and the Rabbi checked it over. So Rabbi Mindel did the Talks and Tales, and Rabbi Chadakov had to distribute to send it out. And the Rebbe began with publication. That's what it's called, Merkas Le'Inyonei Chinuch. Chinuch. The Ike by the Rebbe was Chinuch. That's how he started for Chinuch with children. That's why Talks and Tales was mamish by the Rebbe, was holy as a sikha. As you see in the back of the Siddur, the names was the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe, Chadakov, and Mindel. So while the Rebbe was working, so the Frierdiker Rebbe saw that he was working with the Ramash, the Rebbe called Ramash. So he asked him, can he work for Merkez all day? Because Rabbi Mindel worked part-time for Rashag, for the Lubavitcher Yeshiva. Rashag needed him. And this was before Rabbi Klein was there, and before Rabbi Groner, and before Rabbi Quinn, before Rabbi Simpson. This was all the way in the beginning. So to set up an office, there was no office. They had to set up. they're working in the room, but there was no merkaz, there was nothing. So how did it come about? So Rabbi Mindel wrote a letter to the Frierdiker Rebbe in Hebrew. And I will read this letter in English. A letter from Rabbi Mindel to the Frierdiker Rebbe, Mitzori Shabbos Sheftim 5704, 1944, where he makes suggestions to the Frierdiker Rebbe how to organize merkaz. Kveit Kedushas Admur Shlita, the Frierdiker Rebbe. Greeting and blessing. Okay, this is in Hebrew. The Rebbe is surely aware, means the Frierdiker Rebbe, of the technical challenges we are facing working in merkaz, an organization which Baruch Hashem has spread and grown, and especially as the operation has remained the same as when merkaz was first established, this has caused setback and losses. In brief, the basic things that are lacking, he writes to the Frierdiker Rebbe, there is no orderly office. There's no office. You need an office. There is no suitable secretary. Every office has secretary and the telephones. Or you need a secretary. Later on, as you know, Rabbi Klein this was part of his job. He was like in the office. There are no sufficient hands to assist in the publication of the material, and this results in delays, literally until minutes before Shabbos, at which point there is no time for distribution. When they have to send out talks and tales, or whatever they send out every week, other things, there was no time because there's nobody. There was no hands. There is no warehouse for the printed material, which is now lying in piles all over merkaz office. I guess there was another room. There is no administrator in charge and fundraiser. That's how he writes. Then he writes, we already discussed the above matters with the Rebbe's son-in-law, the Ramash. He writes, he already discussed it. Who is familiar with the nature of the situation. Understandably, there are great hurdles, among them financially, which stand in the way of bettering the situation. In my opinion, there is much that can be done to improve the situation, and we should certainly make the effort to improve it and fill the gap. And although it would initially entail expenses, experience has proven that these expenses would not have been spent in vain, but rather every penny will be returned double and triple fold. I believe I would be able to correct much of this lack enumerated above, given the necessary resources, and I therefore suggest the following. And now he says the following, what should be done. And as a matter of fact, then Julius Stillman was one of the first that gave then $5,000, and that's what they printed the Miyom L'Yom for children that I printed. That's the little Miyom L'Yom he gave then, but that's beside the point. So now I'm going to read what Rabbi Mindel suggested should be done. I am prepared to accept a position in merkaz for 30 hours a week, because he still had to finish off Rabbi with the Rashag. In addition to my work in Toibichet Mimim with the Rashag, we will rent, he writes to the Rebbe, Frierdiker Rebbe, we will rent a room near 770 for an office. The cost of this would be approximately $10 a week, and will include a telephone. Setting up the office will not be more than $100. to make the whole office a telephone and desk and a book, everything. Those days, in the early 40s. Hire a secretary, he says, whose responsibility would be to, number one, assist me in my literary work, in typing, because he wrote, but somebody has to type it. Will reply to correspondence that cost for this another $35 a week. You see, he wrote, the Rebbe corrected, so then he had to write over, correct it, but then he had to be typed. So Rabbi Mindel didn't type, so he needed a typewriter. He needed something to type and a typewriter. And by the way, I have the typewriter here, that typewriter that they typed in Merkez then. And then he writes, until we find a fundraiser, I would undertake this task in the interim. Of course, with the participation of the Ramash and Rabbi Chadekov, since no action can be done without their approval. And that's where he got Stillman. These suggestions and conditions mentioned above are connected one to the other, being that within the next week to 10 days I will be scheduled my work for the coming winter. I would be grateful to receive a reply to the above, and if possible within the week, with deep respect. And he signs his name, and this is a copy to the Ramash, to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe was very, very happy, and that's when Merkers actually started. And by the way, before I finish here, I do want to mention that Kahos Stempel, the emblem is Kahos, was sitting Rabbi Chadekov, Rabbi Mindel, the Rebbe, and the previous Rebbe, and they're figuring out how it should look. Each one had their emblem their way, and they chose one, and this is what Kahos is. This is how it happened. Bichlal Kahos, besides the point. So I'm mentioning it only because this is one of the questions that the people in Eretz Yisrael, as I mentioned last week, wanted to know more or less what the Rebbe did the first years. The Rebbe was big Hatznaleches, and since now it's before Rosh Hashanah, so I want to give a bracha that we should all have Aksiva v'achsimo teva, Lashona teva mesuka, a good year, a happy year, a sweet year, and Uzbet na'ala gute zachen, and we should always know, if we have a question what we should do, think always, what would the Rebbe answer me? Then you're on the right derech. What would the Rebbe say? And that's when the Eibishter will help you Matzliach. Next week we're not going to have a program because it's Rosh Hashanah. So our next program will be a week after Rosh Hashanah. Thank you.